Welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tam Pham. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm excellent. Really glad to be here. We started this podcast to really help people become more productive at work and in life. And we really believe that happy people are productive people. So what we do on the podcast every single week is we share tips and strategies to help you really win your day, win your week, and make time for what matters, really. Help you with your focus and your energy. And sometimes we have guests, and sometimes it's just the two of us. But the key is we always want to give you actionable productivity tips and insights. And we really love getting reviews and feedback. So if you ever have feedback on the show, please feel free to share it. I just wanted to share one bit of feedback from one of our listeners named Tom. And Tom writes, "Many of your podcasts are just too darn long." Thanks so much for sharing that, Tom. We don't want to just share praises. We want to get all of your feedback. And sometimes our episodes are 30 minutes. Sometimes they're an hour. Sometimes they're 4 minutes. And if you're listening to this, we would love to hear from you. What is your sweet spot for episode length that you'd like? If you'd like to get in touch, just leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or you can email us podcast@asianefficiency.com. So thanks so much for that feedback, Tom. We'll try to monitor that episode length, but let's get into it, Tan. What are we going to be talking about today in today's episode?
Today's episode, we have three important topics to talk about, and one that kind of angered me a little bit, which is actually the first topic, which is all about clutter being a good thing. There's actually this phenomenon going on around the internet right now where people are sharing how clutter is actually beneficial for you. And we want to give our take on this, and hint, I totally disagree, but I'll share with you why. The other thing we're going to be talking about is that a popular password manager app, LastPass, got hacked recently. And there's different opinions out there on what actually happened, how severe it was. And we want to give our take on it and what you should do now moving forward, especially if you are a LastPass user. And even if you're not, let's say you're another password manager user, this is something you want to be aware of as well and what you should do about it moving forward. And then the third topic is that we've noticed that a lot of companies are struggling with remote workers, and it has led to what they call quiet firing. And we're going to be talking about what that is, why it's so toxic in the workplace, and what you can do about it moving forward as well. So before we start diving into today's topic, we always like to share our top 3 favorite resources in productivity. So, Brooks, what are they today?
All right. So my first resource comes via friend of the pod, Marie Poulin of Notion fame, and it's the Almond Cow, which is kind of a funny name, but it's a plant-based milk maker. So my family, we go through a lot of cashew milk, oat milk. We don't really drink cow's milk in our family. We go through a lot of it, and this recommendation is it's basically this device like a big jug, and what it allows you to do is really quickly and easily make your own plant-based milk. You just throw some cashews in there, or oats or almonds or whatever you want to make, and then throw in a few other ingredients, put in some water, hit a button, and a minute later, you've got a bunch of plant-based milk. And it's really changed our life in the last couple of weeks, and I really enjoy it. So if you're a plant-based milk drinker, check that out, and you don't like the waste of all the packaging, check that out. That's number 1. Number 2 is the Recommendo newsletter. So this is a newsletter by Kevin Kelly, who you may be familiar with. And basically, it's a weekly newsletter, and the last thing we all need is more email, but it's a really useful newsletter with just a whole bunch of different resources, gadgets, interesting sites, travel tips. It's just every week I really look forward to it, so I thought I'd share the wealth. So it's called Recommendo. And number 3, I was going to recommend a book, but I've decided after a conversation we had in our monthly meeting this month at Asian Efficiency, my recommendation for a book is instead of going out and buying another book or taking it out from the library or whatever, we all have a bunch of books that we've purchased but never got around to reading. So my tip for you for the number 3 is to choose one book that you've bought but haven't read that yet and read that one next. So that is our top 3 resources. You can find links to all those devices and resources that we share in the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com, or in your podcast app, you can just swipe and the links will all be right there. And one thing that's new is you can also find us on YouTube. I don't know about you, Tam, but I've been having a lot of fun on YouTube lately. We've been turning our episodes into short little clips, and we've been putting episodes online and stuff like that. It's been really interesting. And so you can go to theproductivityshow.com/YouTube to access our main YouTube channel, or you can go to theproductivityshow.com/clips for our short little clips that we're making. And of course, what we're going to say next, which is, of course, and subscribe. But yeah, see you over on YouTube. It's been really fun. All right. As we do all of these kind of news episodes, is we like to do a roundup of things that are happening in the productivity world right now and just give you some pointers to some resources. And so I thought I'd share some news. And Tan, I'm really curious what your thoughts on some of these are. And the first one is that Obsidian has released a new feature called Canvas. So we've talked about Obsidian on the podcast before. And the thing about Obsidian is that it's very text-based, which a lot of people like, but Obsidian Canvas gives you a visual way to work with Obsidian, which has really changed the game for a lot of people. It basically is this infinite canvas where you can drag things around, you can connect information visually, add images, PDFs, multimedia files, you can add web pages, you can embed a canvas in a note, and really it just amps up the power while making it more accessible to people who maybe don't like to live in a totally text-based world. So that's the first feature, Obsidian Canvas. It'll be interesting to see if it leads to growth there. The second one is that US productivity has dipped 3 quarters in a row for the first time since 1983. So 2022 is the first year since 1983 where productivity actually dipped. And a chief economist has been saying that employees are working more and producing less at a time when financial stress is the highest. So that's not a great combination. And really, we've been talking about worker productivity in 2022, and now it's 2023, and it seems like it's still continuing. So we're going to be diving into this a little bit later on, but it's just an interesting trend to watch, this trend towards lower productivity, which you would think would be different since there's so many productivity tools now. And then the third topic is that Readwise has released a reader app. So we've talked about Readwise in the past on the podcast. It's a really popular service for taking your Kindle highlights. I think you might even use it, Tan. I can't remember. But you take your Kindle highlights and other things, you save them there, and it can automatically export to your note taker. Or what it can do is it can resurface them to you so you get that kind of continuous learning. So that's always been a part of Readwise, and it still is. But they've now released their own Read It Later app, an Instapaper or Pocket type of thing. It's in public beta right now, and it's got the usual Read It Later stuff. If you're reading something and you want to read it later, you could just clip it to the Readwise reader. But you can also highlight web pages. You can capture YouTube, EPUB books. It has AI features that'll summarize and ask questions about what you're reading. So use that AI stuff we've been talking about in a recent episode, and it can sync all your highlights the way Readwise does to Notion, Obsidian, Evernote. So it's really interesting taking Readwise and making it a more active thing versus a passive thing. So what do you think about that, Tan? I can't remember. Are you a Readwise reader user, and do you think you would become a Readwise reader user, or are you sticking with Pocket?
So I've always been a big fan of Pocket. It's something I still use today. I read a lot of articles on the internet, and sometimes I don't have time to read them right on the spot. So I always send them to Pocket because I have a browser extension where I can just click on it and immediately go to my backlog. And then typically when I'm in transit, like I'm on the plane or I'm in the back of an Uber somewhere, I'll read my backlog of articles because most of them are maybe like 3 to 5 minutes long. And it's just right enough where I can get an article done and then get out of my Uber or out of my transit. Or if I'm on the plane, I can actually read multiple articles and feel like I'm actually informed, because these are all articles I like to read because I saved them. And I said, this is something I'm interested in. If you're not a user of Readwise yet, I highly recommend you go check out the app, because most people, when they read ebooks, they find it very challenging to take the highlights and then actually incorporate the information and learn from it. And what's beautiful about the Readwise app is that when you sync it up, it can actually take your Kindle highlights and then send them to you in bits and pieces to remind you of all the things you've highlighted. So it's a great way of learning, to remember certain things. And also, if you don't want to reread the book, you can go through your notes that way and get the Cliff Notes version of the book you've read. So I'm a big fan of Readwise. Now that they released the new Reader app at Readwise, I am not quite sure if I'm going to switch over just yet, because I'm a huge fan of Pockets. And to me, if I want to make a switch to another app, it has to be 10 times better. And if it's not 10 times better, I tend to not make that switch whatsoever. I'm happy with where I'm at, especially in this case with Pocket. But if it comes out and it is indeed 10 times better, then I will make that decision to say, you know what, this is something I will consider to make a switch to. But I'm not a fan of switching things all the time because I actually have better things to do other than shiny new object syndrome. So for me, it has to be a very compelling thing to switch over to. Moving back to the productivity article, the fact that U.S. productivity has dipped 3 quarters in a row, I think is very alarming, according to the CNBC article. And the fact that it's the first time since 1983 should be very telling where our economy is going. And I think that's something that everyone should be aware of, that, hey, we're still debating whether we're in a recession or not, but the fact that the U.S. productivity is dipping 3 quarters in a row should tell you that things aren't looking quite positive just yet. So what you can do moving forward is actually investing in your personal productivity and actually be more productive, because it's a way for you to stand out, and that's actually beneficial for you. Because as companies are laying off people and hiring freezes are happening, the best people that are productive, that are getting stuff done, that are producing, are going to stick around, or are the ones that are being hired. And I would like that, obviously, to be you. So listening to the productivity show, following Asian efficiency, I think is going to be a good thing. But we're going to be diving deeper into this a little bit later as well.
All right. Yep, totally agree. And I guess if you're for the Readwise thing, I guess if your main use case is clipping articles and reading them in an Uber or on a plane or whatever, yeah, there's not a lot of value of switching to another read it later app if all you're doing is that core thing. It's just if you're doing more than that, I think that then it gets more compelling. So it really depends on your use case. All right, let's get into some industry happenings. We're discussing some topics that we see, some trends that we see happening in productivity. And I will go first, if you don't mind, Tan. And full disclosure, and you've already referenced it, I put this article or this topic in this episode purely because I knew it would make you mad and I wanted to see what would happen. And I'm very happy to see that it worked. Topic number 1, and that is the question that can clutter be good for you, essentially? And the reason I put this in here is sometimes you see an article or a topic and you just think, okay, whatever, it's just a random thing. But when you start seeing multiple things on the same topic, that kind of like tweaks your attention. And at least for me, and I start digging into, is there more going on there? So it just so happened that within a few days of each other, The Atlantic released an article called I Love My Clutter, Thank You Very Much. And these are both kind of opinion pieces. And then a couple of days later, New York Times released one called Clutter is Good for You. And then I saw those, and then a bunch of professional organizers were talking about it, which is how this surfaced to me. And then I saw that there's this trend on TikTok. TikTok always has trends. There's this TikTok trend called Cluttercore, where people were sharing how they are surrounding themselves with stuff. And so I realized that there's clearly something going on here. And it's that idea that maybe there's a backlash against decluttering. This term clutter has been conflating with hoarding. There's Marie Kondo's, and Marie Kondo has made an industry out of tidying up, of course, at the same time selling products, selling you more stuff. And then there's become this aspect of clutter shaming, where if people are coming over, you say, oh, I'm such a hoarder, or you're going crazy trying to straighten things up when people are coming over and stuff like that. And I thought it was an interesting thing. The Atlantic article in particular, the author quoted a professional organizer over in the UK who said that clutter really should be measured not by the volume of stuff you have, but the owner's feelings about it. And if clutter is causing stress and distraction, of course that's a productivity problem. We all know that. But if it's not, people talk themselves into saying things like, oh, all this stuff around me makes me happy, or I'm just more productive if I have everything around me and I know where everything is. And people are able to talk themselves into living with it and convincing themselves that they're thriving with clutter. It goes against what we've talked about multiple times on the podcast. We often talk about the productivity benefits of decluttering. But what do you think, Tan? I guess we've already teased it, but can this aspect of clutter core and loving your clutter, can it go too far? Is some level of controlled chaos okay? What do you think of this kind of backlash towards decluttering?
When I read this article about how clutter can be beneficial, the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, this is a piece of garbage. What am I about to read here? I can't believe I'm actually about to read this. So I actually dove into it. The first article made me very angry. The second article is just a long fluff piece. We're still going to link to it, but I just want to warn people that it's just that if you want to waste your time, the second article is a huge waste of time. So my take on it is that the authors really don't know what they're talking about. And when I mean they don't know what they're talking about, they just don't know what it feels like to be clutter free. It's if you are okay with eating junk food every single day and you do it in controlled portions, is that a bad thing? It's not ideal, but if you're eating it every day and you kind of are within your calorie range, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not great either, right? Just if you sleep 5 hours a night and you're okay with it, you can get your stuff done, that's fine. Like we can get easily used to that, and our baseline for what's okay is actually quite low because we can adapt very quickly. However, if you go from 5 hours a night to sleeping 8 hours a night, there's a huge difference in how you feel, how energetic you are, and there's a new baseline of what's possible. So to me, when I read the articles, it just came across as these people just don't know what it feels like to be completely clutter-free and to have a streamlined home, like a clutter-free home where, I don't know about you, like anytime I come home from vacation or a long trip, when my place is like organized and clean, I just feel so calm and relaxed. Whereas if I come home and it's organized, but there's a little bit of chaos and there's like clutter some places here and there, it doesn't quite have the same serene feeling of like calmness and stillness. And to me, when I read the article, it just said, you know what, I'm okay with having a little clutter. And to me, that in itself is okay. But to say that clutter is a good thing and that we shouldn't shame people for having clutter, okay, can agree with that too. Like we shouldn't have to shame people. But to outright say that it's actually a good thing and you should be okay with it, I think that's where I go, hey, you've gone too far, buddy. You shouldn't be pushing and promoting that clutter is a good thing, because one thing we always like to say is clutter represents delayed decisions. When you have clutter laying around, it just means that you haven't made a decision yet, or you haven't decided yet what you're going to do with it. And that's why it's still there. And that's why it's piling up. However, there's one thing in the article I do, and that is the observation that someone else wrote, which is hoarding is vertical versus clutter is horizontal. And I actually agree with that. Like when you're a hoarder, you tend to collect a lot of things and it grows. Whereas clutter can actually be horizontally. It can be across all different things, and it's just disorganized and it's just delayed decisions, essentially. And so if you're a hoarder, I think that's like the worst place to be, right? If you're a little cluttered, that's not ideal either. But we don't want to have both. We don't want to have clutter and hoarding at the same time. That's like having a massive ocean that you're trying to clean up. That's just mission impossible right there. So as someone who used to be a hoarder, and as someone who used to be a hardcore minimalist, and someone who was clutter free for a while too, it's like you can tell the difference that is almost like night and day. It's kind of like sleeping 5 hours versus 8 hours. It can seem like a minor difference until you see the other side. And once you've seen the other side, you go, this is what it can feel like, or this is what a great relationship can look like, or this is what sleeping 8 hours can feel like. Or if you haven't worked out in a while, you feel okay, but then you start working out for a little bit and you start exercising 3-4 times a week. You just feel like another sense of alertness and productivity and focus that you knew was there, but you didn't really know until you actually went to that line and said, oh, this is what it feels like. And that's, to me, is like ultimately what people should experience is when you have clutter-free stuff around your house, it's much easier to be productive.
Yeah, it's like when you go on vacation and you find you go somewhere, I don't know, a resort or something like that, and you have nothing to worry about, you have nothing going on, no decisions to make, and you just feel this like your stress level just drain, and you didn't really realize how much you needed it. And I think that's a great observation. I also really liked that observation about clutter is horizontal and hoarding is vertical. This is something that professional organizers say a lot, which is you want to file, don't pile, which is to say that you can have your stuff around if that's what you want. But anytime you start piling things on top of each other, then you've got a problem, because then you're not going to be able to find what you need without a lot of work. So I like that saying. And yeah, it was an interesting topic. I'm going to keep my eye on this, because I think it'll be interesting to see if there's going to be more of a pushback against this minimalism and decluttering, and what that's going to mean for productivity as well. All right, let's move on to topic number 2 on a totally different subject. And that is that LastPass was hacked. And really, here is what you need to know. And there's a lot of chatter on this online, but we're going to link to an article from The Verge. And basically, in August 2022, LastPass had their servers hacked. And this isn't in and of itself that shocking. Any online system is going to be hacked eventually. It's just the law of the universe. And LastPass has had like minor hacks before where nothing major was taken. But it turns out the hack in August was the kind of precursor to another hack in November. And this time users' vaults were taken. And that is not good. You can have little things taken from an online password system, and that's fine. But when vaults are taken, that is really not a bad thing. Or that's really not a good thing. And apparently, what's since come to light is that really the company did not do a good job disclosing it. They really waited. The initial hack happened in August. The kind of more major one happened in November. But it wasn't until the end of December that they put out a statement that cybersecurity researchers have just basically piled onto. They called it full of omissions, half-truths, and outright lies. And again, that's not a good thing from a password management system. If you want anything from them, you want transparency, you want clarity. Our most important stuff is stored with a password manager system. So releasing a statement that wasn't really accurate, again, is a pretty bad thing. Now, we don't use LastPass. We used to. We use 1Password, which as a company and also individually. And of course, I went over to Reddit to see what people there were saying in the 1Password Reddit. And people were asking, we'll link to this thread. People were asking the 1Password people, hey, could this happen? And to 1Password's credit, they said, they didn't say, oh no, we could never be hacked and that type of thing. They were very upfront. They said, if something's online, nothing is unhackable. The problem with LastPass is they were extra vulnerable because their vaults just have a master key, and that's up to the user whether that master key is good or not good. Whereas 1Password, what they do is they also use a 1Password, a master key. That's what we all know by 1Password. But they also have a secret key that each client has that's auto-generated. So that makes it more secure because it's doubled. Again, they're not claiming that it can never be hacked, but they're saying, hey, here are the reasons why you're probably better off using a system like this. But what got me thinking about this, and the reason I wanted to bring it up with you, Tan, is that this kind of shows the vulnerability of password managers storing their data server side. So when we all first started using password managers by 1Password, everything was stored on your computer, or maybe it was synced by Dropbox or something like that. But more and more of them, 1Password included, have gone the opposite way, where our data is stored on their servers and we're trusting them to do the right thing. So given all of this, what do you think of this idea of having password information stored on company servers? Are you okay with it? Are you thinking maybe you want to take your stuff out of the cloud and just have it locally again? Or maybe are you thinking of forgetting all this and just using the password managers in say Mac or in Chrome or something like that? Where are you with this, given all the LastPass hack stuff?
The fact that LastPass got hacked for the 7th time in the last 10 years, I think is a huge red flag. So if you're a LastPass user, you should ideally move away from it and move to another password tool like 1Password, which is one I personally use, or another popular one is called Bitwarden. And a third option, which is a little simpler, is the native password tool that like Mac operating system have and Google has as well, that you use on your phone or on your computer. And the fact that it got hacked and multiple people who are experts in the security industry disagree about their statements, I think is just a huge sign that you should really move away from this platform. It's just not secure. We moved away from it like 2-3 years ago, mostly because it was just very difficult to use. And the fact that it was also insecure now, and now that we know, I think is just more of a sign to say, hey, you should really stop using it. Even though it's great, it has a wide user base, I think there's a lot of great alternatives that are a lot more secure. With that said, the question when it comes to should you use a password manager online, in the cloud, yes or no, I think there's pros and cons to that. It's if you're holding money in a bank, it's the same thing. You can hold your money at home, right, and keep it secure yourself, but then you have to go to bed knowing that someone might rob you and you have to keep it secure. And if you go on a trip somewhere, like you're going to be worried about storing your money at home. Versus if you put it in a bank, yeah, you might have to get worried that your bank might get hacked or there might be a robbery taking place. But which option do you prefer? I think most of us actually like to go to the bank option and say, you know what, I'm going to store my money in a bank account at an actual bank versus storing it ourselves. And that's the same thing with passwords. You can store it locally, but then you are responsible for the backups. You're responsible for making sure that the security on your computer is good, making sure that everything is locked down, that nothing gets deleted whatsoever, right? If the file gets deleted, you might lose everything. These are responsibilities that you have to take on. Versus if you store a password in the cloud with a secure server and security protocols in place, like with 1Password as an example, which is what we use, then you make it a lot easier for yourself to be able to log in on multiple devices. There's less responsibility on your part. The only thing you have to do is remember your master password, which is hopefully long, hard to guess. It's not a typical word, has numbers and different characters, ideally 12 characters or longer. And if you just have to remember that thing, it's much more convenient for that reason. So personally, I'm a big fan of using stuff in the cloud. It makes things very inconvenient. I just make sure that my master password is really long. I can't tell you how long it is. That would give it away. But it's really long. And it will take a little bit of typing to figure it out. And sometimes I mistype it and I miss a character and whatnot. And so that's like the downside of that is that you have to remember that. And also you have to live with the fact that it is online and it's going to be a target. It's going to be a honeypot for hackers to go, hey, I want to target this. But I'm willing to make that trade-off for the convenience of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of options for storing your data locally if that's something you choose to do, like Strongbox, Bitwarden, like you said. I think KeyPass XC, I might be saying that wrong, so I'll make sure to fix it in the show notes. But there are definitely options for that. But I think I would be very careful of that. If you're somebody who is into this stuff, if you are somebody who, again, you're going to take all those security steps, if you know what you're doing, you know how to generate secure keys and that type of thing, maybe you have some way of storing your secure key offsite in case something ever happens to you. This is something I always worried about, especially when I was using 1Password locally only, is if something ever happened to me, like all our bank passwords are in there, the ability to access our online information was there. And that would always be my nightmare is if something happened to me, would my wife be able to get into 1Password so that she could get into all of our stuff? And so using something like an online system with maybe a family plan or something like that is a way to get around that. But if you're not going to do that, which is totally legit, I totally understand anyone who says, hey, I'm just taking my stuff locally, forget about all this. But you need to make sure you're doing it in a responsible way. Otherwise, you might be in a situation where, yeah, you're not hacked, but you also can't get at your stuff or your loved ones can't get at your stuff.
So in short, if you are a LastPass user, knowing that it got hacked 7 times in the last 10 years, here's what you need to do. Move over to another password manager like 1Password or Bitwarden or the other ones we've mentioned. Set up 2-factor authentication for everything you already have set up. That's the basic thing. And then also update your master password right now to be at least 12 characters long. If you do those 3 things, I think you're going to be in great shape.
All right. So that is our first 2 topics. Now, Tan, I know you had a third topic you wanted to talk about. We've talked about quiet quitting a lot, but we came across this article in the Financial Post, which basically said that quiet quitters are starting to get quiet fired. So quiet quitters we have talked about on the podcast before, but we've never talked about quiet firing before. So Tan, maybe you can talk us through some of the productivity stuff that's going on around that.
So there was an article released by the Financial Post, and they talked about quiet firing, which is the idea that employees are not getting one-on-one conversations. They're being slowly frozen out of the company. So instead of actually directly firing them, you're just isolating them, making them feel like less worthy, not valued by the company, so that they eventually leave the company and seek another job elsewhere. So that saves you a lot of time in terms of compensation, severance packages, working on their development plans, and all the other things that you do in investing in an employee. And so one of the things that is happening lately now in the workforce is that more companies are taking this quiet firing approach to their employees. And the reason they blame this phenomena from happening, or that it is, the reason they're blaming this thing that is happening right now is that remote work has become really challenging for managers and owners of companies because they simply don't know how to run a company in a remote setting. And they feel like they can't track their employees. They can't measure if they're actually doing their stuff. There's no way of telling if people are actually happy or engaged. And so they're finding it very difficult to know who is actually doing their stuff, who is not. And then also the engagement is quite low, especially if you're in a hybrid situation where some people are coming into the office and some people are remote. Like, how do you deal with that? And so if you're in a situation where you're running a company right now and you have remote employees, or you have a hybrid system where some people come in and some people are working remote. I've been remote since 2011. Our company has been remote since day one. And if you're in that situation, here are some of my tips. First thing I would do is that if you have a hybrid situation, make sure that the remote people are valued the same way as the people are in the office. Just because someone isn't in the office doesn't mean that they're less valuable. You want to make sure you treat everybody the same, including how you handle meetings, how you handle feedback, buddying it up, and making sure that you have rapport with everybody in the same level. Remote workers are just as valued as people who come into the office. There's no difference there, and you shouldn't be treating them differently either. Also, one pro tip when it comes to remote teams is that when you have meetings, turn cameras on. It's such a small thing, but when you can see other people's faces, especially when they're like in their normal state, they have their hair up, maybe not everyone has their makeup on, maybe not everyone's looking quite ready for the day, but there's something human about it when you turn cameras on and you can actually see each other. That creates a connection versus having anonymous faces on a call where everyone can be distracted and doing other things. When you are on a meeting with cameras on, everyone tends to be a lot more present. And also it creates this subtle connection because you can actually see each other and know what each other looks like that day, and also have this like face-to-face meeting as well. So that's another thing I would say that you should do when you are running a remote company. My other tip for running a remote company is to meet in person at least once a year. That's like the bare minimum. Ideally, if you can, especially if you're in the same country or in the same continent, once a quarter would be even more ideal, because you want to have regular in-person communication and collaboration to foster that relationship you have with people. I've seen it over and over again. Whenever we meet in person as a company, things just go a little faster. We get our sense of humor. We get how people work, how people think, how they make jokes. We kind of understand how they prefer to do certain things. We can transfer a lot of knowledge. There's just so much power meeting in person. So just because you're completely remote shouldn't mean that you should never meet in person. I would actually encourage you to think about how can you actually meet in person more often. So instead of having office space and rents that you're paying every single month, reinvest some of that into meeting in person. And I think you're going to get a lot of productivity benefits from that as well.
I found the article, the way it described quiet firing, just unbelievable. Like the stuff about how managers aren't really firing people because they're not technically doing quiet quitters. They're not technically doing anything that you could theoretically fire them for, but doing things like avoiding one-on-one conversations, refusing to give feedback, holding back information, that type of thing. And I think about that, and I think about other stuff that the article, and I've read other articles like this, say that people just after the pandemic, people who maybe were working remote or hybrid and then having to go back to the office, it was saying stuff like they don't know how to interact with each other anymore. I just read this stuff and it just seems unbelievable to me that all this could change in the span of just a year or two. Are these people not adults? Do people really, truly not know how to interact with each other? It's just unbelievable to me. So I'm going to be watching this quiet quitting, quiet firing thing because it just seems shocking to me that it seems like we're moving into this employment phase where people really don't know how to interact on a personal basis. And I just don't know how that's possible, but I guess we'll see. Apparently it is.
I think the root cause of all of this is that because companies don't know how to run a remote company, it just leads to byproducts of problems that people are still trying to figure out. So like, it's really easy in a remote company to work in silo where one person works on one thing, another person works on another thing, and they never talk. And because of that, there's no engagement, and employee engagement can be quite low for that reason. And we actually had the same problem for a while. We had to figure out a way to stop working in silos and actually start collaborating and pairing up together more often. Even though we knew what to do and how to do it, by pairing up and having this shared time together, we actually create better relationships among team members, but also we actually foster more creativity and ideas because when two people come together, work through a problem or a challenge or a task together, oftentimes the quality goes up of the work that is produced, but also employee engagement goes up because everybody is getting to learn each other. And as everybody knows, when you have a best friend at work or somebody that you're very close to, you're more likely to stay with them in terms of your engagement at the company, or with them where they go next. And everybody wins in that situation. So while remote work is great, don't forget the human element aspect. And I think a lot of companies are still trying to figure out how do we make remote work where employee engagement is high, and yet at the same time, we can measure people's performances as well.
Anyway, Tan, you're on blast now. If you start skipping one-on-ones, if you start avoiding feedback, I know what's going on. I'm watching you. All right. I think we've got our 3 topics. I think it's been an interesting episode, at least for me. And I'm curious, what should people take away from this besides get off LastPass if they're on it now? What sort of action do you want people to take after this?
Well, after every single episode, we always want to make sure that there's one thing you can take away from today. And I would say clutter is a bad thing. So make sure you declutter right now. So if you have a messy desk, go declutter it right now. Spend the next 2-3 minutes just getting rid of stuff, cleaning it up for a little bit. And you're going to feel a lot better next time you sit down at your desk again. And finally, again, if you are a LastPass user, move away right now. Go to 1Password. Highly recommend it. You won't regret it.